Right before we jump into this video, if you'd like me to send you a free guide to capturing motion in low light situations, just look for this orange box over on froknowsphoto.com, put your name, email address in it, hit send it. I'm gonna send you that guide for free. Jared Polin, froknowsphoto.com, and this is a review of the SONY 400-800mm f6.3 G lens. Now I say it's a G lens, it's not a G master lens, but honestly, this thing feels more professional than a lot of other lenses I've held on to, so I don't know that there's much of a difference between G and GM anymore, especially in a lens like this. Now this is the first Sony lens that goes beyond 600 millimeters because Sony had their 200-600, which is a couple of years old at this point, and I would think that a version 2 is possibly around the corner, but you ask the question of, well, do I go with a 2-6? Do I go with a 4-8? And that is something we will answer at the end of this video. And prior to this lens coming out, if you wanted more reach, what did you need to do? You needed to crop or throw on a teleconverter. You can throw on a teleconverter onto this bad boy, a 1.4 and a 2x, but I don't think that I would recommend it, and we'll talk about that when we get into the images. Sony says that this lens is for wildlife and birders. I tend to agree with that because birders always want more reach, you know, to get that little titmouse sitting on a branch 8 miles away instead of getting closer, but they'll fly away, whatever. 4-8 is a perfect range for that. It might be useful for sports, and they've recommended some other niche things like motorcycles or skiing. Honestly, anything outdoors at a distance, this might come in handy. So what did I use it for? Well, I took it to a men's lacrosse game that was outside, and it was even lighting because it was totally overcast, so there were clouds in the sky, and it made it easy to just keep the exposure basically the same. 4-8 outdoors for sports is an interesting range, and you're gonna see the difference between 4, 6, and 8, so you can see and help decide what is right for you, a 2-6 or a 4-8. And I also took it to the Philadelphia Zoo, where I love to photograph the eagles that sit outside, except for the fact that the avian flu, bird flu, is going around, and those birds have been locked away. And I was like, well, I could go shoot the penguins. They're outdoors, and they're like, oh, we sent them to Pittsburgh. Literally, they sent the penguins to Pittsburgh because they're redoing the enclosure. So the only thing I got to photograph indoors was the birds in the aviary, which is like the tropical rainforest. But I did get a tiger outside, so that was well worth it. So now let's get to the outside of the lens and the feel of the lens. It's a heavy lens. Can you handhold it? The answer is, if you look like me, you can, but I used a monopod with it because it just felt right for long-term shooting and for giving me the extra stability, especially in lower light situations when I wanted to keep my shutter speed lower because I didn't want my ISO to be super high. Now, one of the first things that I noticed, because I figured I'd be using it on a monopod, is you just freely twist this, your tripod collar, and there's no clicking. I don't know why they make these things without clicks. I'd like to know what the center click is. Instead, you have a dot there and you can just line it up and lock it in. Is it a deal breaker in the end of the day? The answer is no, but it was just something I noticed that separates pro lenses from not pro lenses. Now, this again is a G lens, not a GM, but honestly, it feels super professional, really focuses well. It's just a very nice lens. I like this touch right here. There is a button on the outside of the lens hood. You now do this, you put the lens hood on, get it on there straight, clip it in, it locks. Nice rubber on the end of it. You have your door right here if you're gonna put an ND filter on it. You have a 105mm filter on the front of this, which means a 105mm lens cap. On the side of the lens, there are a lot of switches. You have your AF to manual focus switch. Then under that, you have your full-time DMF, which is your manual focus override, which I have on, and it's a good thing I had it on because it came in handy in the aviary when trying to get the birds in focus, because there's a huge net that is just really tight fencing and it was hard to focus through it. So I just sat there and turned the manual focus ring until the bird got in focus, and then the autofocus locked on perfectly. So in that situation, it came in handy, so it was perfect there. You've got your limiter for distance, you have your optical stabilization on and off, and you have your mode switches for 1, 2, and 3 for your optical stabilization. It also has 3 custom function buttons, where when you compare that to the Canon only has 2. In terms of weight, this lens weighs in at 5.46 pounds, or 2,475 grams. Now the 200-600 weighs 4.66 pounds, or 2,115 grams, obviously about a pound lighter, and Canon's 200-800, which I haven't mentioned just yet, they were pretty much going after this lens right here. And this lens weighs a pound less at 4.5 pounds, or 2,041 grams. But I just wanted to show you side by side just for a quick second. 2-800, and this is a 4-800, an interesting choice that Sony made that Canon decided to go with something slightly different. So is this a balanced lens? The answer is it feels front heavy until you put your hand in the right place. When you put your hand on the zoom ring, it is perfectly balanced. It was kind of weird because I picked it up, I'm like, wait a second, it's not balanced, until you put your hand where it belongs, and then it's perfectly balanced. Now, how is the throw? Now, this is an internal zooming lens, meaning it will not extend, which you'll see in just a second with the Canon, but this is the throw. We are at, this is 800, this is 400. 800, 400. Let me show you this way. We're on 400, I just move my thumb and we go to 800. This is like they call it a 2-inch throw. This is really simple to go from 4 to 8. And honestly, it's not as much of a zoom as you would expect to go from 4 to 8. It's just super quick, just like that. Now, just for fun, let's show you what the Canon throw can do. Can I do it with just my thumb? The answer to that question is nah. This is what happens with your thumb. That's me going from 200 to 800. Sony told us that it's 2.5 times longer of a throw, but yeah, of course, it's 2 to 8. This is 4 to 8. It's better to say, this is 400, hold on, there's 400, there's 800. 400, 800. The throw is a little longer with this from 4 to 8 than this one, and also it's 2.5 inches difference. The Canon extends 2.5 inches further than the Sony because the Sony's internal. Just to show you, we're gonna make another video in the future that goes over all of the lens choices if you're deciding what system to go with, but if you already shoot with Sony, you're not gonna end up with this 200 to 800 from Canon. If you're wondering what the length is, this is 13.6 inches or 346 millimeters long. It's 1 inch longer than the 2-600 from Sony, which came out many years ago. But keep in mind, that's not taking into account the lens hood, that's with the lens hood off. So let's jump into the images right now because I've got a bunch of them from lacrosse. Like I said, it was an overcast day. I got out there, sat where I wanted to sit, and had the whole field right in front of me to work with a 4 to 8. It's very rare that you use 800 millimeters for sports. I've taken it out to the Phillies game and used an 800 millimeter and got some incredible results, but a lot of people find themselves using 400s and just end up cropping to get more bang for their buck. The more you crop, the more imperfections you introduce. So when you can just do it without having to crop, you're probably going to get better quality. Can you actually separate a subject from another subject at f8 if they're close together, right around 800 millimeters? And the answer to that is yes. You can see that the subject right behind this guy is not perfectly in focus. Now, it's not the same as shooting 2.8. It's not the same as shooting f2 or 1.2. But again, the price of this versus using a 400 2.8 is extreme, or a 600 f4. We're talking $10,000+ differences. It's not the ideal sports lens, but it can get the job done. And we'll have to figure out, do you want a 2 to 6 or a 4 to 8, like I said. So these two images, you can see the difference and they work out really well. Nice and sharp, the focus looks good. Contrast, once I edited the raw files with some Skittles, looked really nice as well. Now, if you are wanting to see a difference between 4 and 800 millimeters, all we have to do is look at the goal. I am sitting at the complete ass opposite end of the field, focusing on the goalie. This is what the goalie looks like at 400 millimeters. It is a wasteful, worthless shot at 400. It's even a worthless shot at 600. But at 800, when you can look at these images right here and you can fill the frame with this one And this shot right here with the action in front of the net, that's pretty incredible. Yes, the background's in focus because it's f8, but keep in mind from 6.3 to f8 is roughly 2/3 of a stop. So you're getting a little bit of difference. You're losing a little bit of light as you zoom, but it's not that extreme, like going from 5.6 to f9 or 6.3 all the way up to f9. So you're getting some very nice results going from 4 to 8. It's pretty incredible that you have 800 millimeters. Let me cut in here real quick and say I hope you're enjoying this review of the Sony 400 to 800. And if you're looking for a way to support what we do, all of this free content, check out our presets from FroPack 4 right here, starting with Blue's Clues, followed by Brooklyn, C41. We've got Copper Tone, Kaleidoscope, Saltwater Taffy, Thick, and Wet Hot American Summer. And my all-time favorite from FroPack 1, with one click, we've got Skittles, and it goes boom. But all new and exclusive to FroPack 4, we have 4 custom adaptive Lightroom presets called Face Enhance, Full Body Skin Enhance, Eye Only Enhance, and Background Blur. So look, if you want to speed up your raw workflow, give yourself a great starting point, or you're just tired of other people's presets sucking, as you can see, our presets do not suck. To check them out right now, head on over to fronosphoto.com/FroPack4. While you're over there, you can play with the sliders to see the befores and the afters. And if you decide to pick them up right now, they are currently on sale. Or if you want to save even more, you can get FroPack 1, 2, 3, and 4 as the FroPack bundle. And yes, that includes Skittles. Now, let's get back to the video. So I know one of the things that people want to know is where does the aperture change? Well, at 400 millimeters, of course, you're at 6.3. At 485 millimeters, you go to 7.1. And at 600 millimeters, it's f8. So from 600 to 800, it's f8. Whereas with the 200 to 600, at 600, you're at 6.3. So that difference might mean the difference between having an ISO that's at 20,000 versus having an ISO that is at 12,800. You just have to keep all of this in mind as you're using variable aperture lenses. Now, as we move on, how is the focus tracking? How is it subject tracking? I used it on the Sony A9 III. That is the camera that I have here. I don't have an A1 II right now. I did dumb down the shooting speed to 15 frames per second, and I turned off pre-capture because I didn't want to leave with 8,000 freaking photos. So in terms of continuous autofocus, fantastic. You have 2 linear motors in this bad boy. The focus was incredible, and that's why I say the difference between G Masters, and a G lens, it's starting to really come together, and they're basically the same. Now, I know a lot of people had complaints, and I had complaints with the 2 to 600, that out at the 600 end, it might have been just a little soft, and this is not soft out at 800. And that's leading me to believe that we probably will see a new 2 to 600 at some point, which would be nice, that you would have to make the decision between a 2 to 6 or a 4 to 8. And you know that the birders wanting to get extra reach are definitely going to look at something like a 4 to 8. But also in this image of the subject running down the field, I wanted to show you what the different depth of fields look like, because what was I at here? I was at 448 millimeters, and you can see that the guy chasing him is pretty much sort of in focus, but then the number 35 out at the distance, he's completely gone. And the fans, they're not completely obliterated, but they're not a distraction as much. Moving on, we've got where you actually have a distraction in the background, because this subject is closer to the background. We're at 400 millimeters, which means we're at 6.3. All of the snow in the background's in focus. This guy just standing there watching's in focus. That shack's in focus. That's more of a distraction. So that's the trade-off you get by not having a 2.8, but you're also saving roughly $10,000. And the last photo I want to show you from Lacrosse happened right off of face-off. So they have a little scrum at the face-off, and then the players came my way, and I was at 800 filling the frame. You wouldn't be able to fill the frame this much, obviously, with 400. People would end up cropping, which is what most sports shooters do, but you're gonna stick with better quality when you're able to fill the frame at 800 and not have to worry about cropping after the fact. Yes, it's at f8, but we're saving from the imperfections. Now, in terms of getting my exposure outdoors, I started with auto ISO and I quickly got out of it because it was bumping it up to 8,000 and 10,000 because it was being thrown off by the background, the dark background versus the light subjects wearing white shirts versus blue shirts. And I just went back out, changed it myself, and was anywhere around 4,000 ISO to 3,200 ISO. And that was it. So I took more control of it myself and then just changed my shutter speed because of the variable aperture. Now let's jump out to the zoo where basically no animals were out because it was like 30 degrees or 29 degrees, but thankfully there was a tiger out so I could get some photos there, and I could still go into the aviary but stay in the main area, and they locked all the doors because we couldn't walk through because of the bird flu. You do have 11 blades in this lens. Is your background bokeh going to be that incredible? I don't know. I say this every time I make a video. Stop pixel peeping this stuff. It's gonna be fine. It's gonna be what it is, because you're not spending 10 grand more to buy a 400 or a 600 to get that super buttery clean background blur. So this is your 400 millimeters. This is 600 millimeters. Now keep in mind, a 200 to 600 is only gonna give you this, and then 800 bangs you in just a little bit closer. That's why this is a wildlife nature lens. A lot of people like taking these lenses out because they can't get close to their subjects, and the best thing they can do is crop or teleconverter, and they end up with what they end up with. But if you can't get it at 800 millimeters, it's probably not worth getting. Now, since I just mentioned teleconverters, you can, like I said earlier, put the teleconverters on here. You can put your 1.4 on there, and the 1.4 is gonna give you 1120 millimeters at the 800, and with the 2x teleconverter, you're out at 1600 freaking millimeters, but at f16. So keep that in mind when you are going and doing these photos, especially if you're in lower light situations and you're trying to get birds flying. It's much harder at f8. Well, actually, it's much harder at f16 to get that fast shutter speed, because if you're at 1/1000th of a second at f16, where's your ISO gonna be? Even on a bright day, it's gonna be pumped up to the extreme and you're gonna lose a ton of quality. I personally rather see you crop at that point to keep that ISO down, and I think you would end up with better results. So when I went into the aviary, there's a huge net and fence that's super tight knit that is not the easiest to shoot through. It's not ideal for shooting these types of images, but that's what I had, and that's the time I had to test. Now right here, you can see we are at 400 millimeters on this baby bird. I don't know what this is. Sharp, colorful, it's fine, but this is your 400. This is where your 600 ends. So I'm only 15 feet from this bird. I'm not that far away. And I know a lot of you aren't gonna be able to be this close to most of the things that you're shooting. And then this is 800 millimeters. Now, in terms of settings, I'm at 1/500th of a second at f8 at ISO 4000. There's times where I went to 1/320th of a second because I wanted to make sure that my ISO wasn't too high just for quality's sake, but there's some motion blur in here because the bird was moving as I was taking the photos, trying to peck at this kiwi fruit or whatever the hell that fruit is. But then I regrouped, the bird sat still, nice and sharp, nice and pretty looking. We're at 1/320th at 6.3 at 5000 ISO because I'm only at 400 millimeters. And the last thing that I wanted to photograph at the zoo were the primates who weren't outside because of how cold it was, and it's very challenging indoors with a 400 to 800, especially when the monkey sits super close to you or the gorilla sits super close to you. And I went with a super tight shot at 400 millimeters, but here I'm at 1/400th of a second at 6.3 at 8000 ISO. So you are definitely pushing the extreme and pushing the limits indoors with this lens, and that's why it's mostly outdoor, better light situations where this lens is gonna shine. So how much is this lens? The lens is priced at $28.99, which is $1,000 more than Canon's 200 to 800. Keep in mind, Canon's is a 200 to 800, but it does go up to f9 instead of f8, but you're getting a huge range. The 200 to 600 from Sony is $2,000, so $900 difference. The idea is coming down to which lens is right for you. Do you want a 2-6, which in my opinion is more versatile, but it's older? I think a second generation would be something that I personally would look at myself, especially if you're a sports shooter who can afford something more expensive. A 2-6 outdoors is gonna give you more bang for your buck in my opinion, because most sports shooting doesn't go beyond 600. I mean, rarely goes beyond 400. Most shooters are 400-2.8s, and that's about it. But if you are a birder, if you are into wildlife, this is a beautiful lens. Updated, like I said, it's a G, but not a GM, but it acts as a full-on professional lens. It's exquisite, it's done extremely well. You're getting a lot of bang for your buck for 400-800 millimeters. Just bear in mind that aperture at f8, you need that extra light, and you just need to be aware of higher ISOs giving you less quality. Now, Canon has the 200-800. Do you like what they did here better? Going with a it's not as balanced, it's external zooming. Do you like 200-800, or do you prefer something like the 400-800 that's all internal zooming? Let me know down below. Let me cut in here real quick and let you know that this video is brought to you by Squarespace. If you're looking to build your very own online portfolio or have a store to sell some of your work, use what I've been using for my personal website for more than 15 years at jaredpolin.com, because it's simple, easy, affordable, and I don't need to know any coding, and it's really easy to sell my photos right there in the e-commerce store that Squarespace lets me set up. So to get your 14-day free trial, head on over to squarespace.com/FronosPhoto. If you decide that it's for you, use the code FronosPhoto at checkout to get 10% off your first order. So the question still comes down to, for you Sony shooters, is do you want the versatility of a 2-6, or do you want the reach of a 4-8? That's for you to figure out. I've already said that a 2-6 is more versatile for what I personally shoot, and I think it's more versatile for sports shooters, because I think 4-8 is overkill when it comes to sports, but not for wildlife and not for birds. Two very important tests to do right now. We've got the sniff test and the wind tunnel test. Let's sniff it. Oh, it smells like the Pittsburgh Penguins. Evgeny Malkin, that little smells like anyway, it smells really good. Wind tunnel test. I'm having trouble blowing today from the remnants of the flu. Definitely failed the test. Definitely big failure of the wind tunnel test. So at the end of the day, which way do you go? This is a great lens. I was pretty surprised to actually like it. I didn't think I was going to, but the build quality, the focus speed, the clarity, the sharpness, the throw, everything that went into building this lens, they nailed. So it's up to you to decide if this is right for you. Let me know what you guys think down below. If you'd like to pick one up, you could always go to Alan's camera. They are linked down below as well. So thank you guys very much for watching. Jared Polin, FronosPhoto.com. See ya.